January 1960, Hollywood, California. A party at a house in Bel Air. The kind of party that did not have a guest list because the people who came to it did not need to be on lists. The house belonged to a producer whose name does not matter for this story. What matters is who was in the room at approximately 11:30 on that January evening, and what was said between two of them, and what happened in the years that followed because of it. Dean Martin was 42 years old that January, and at the precise apex of what most people who study these things consider his powers. Not his commercial peak, that would come a few years later, with Everybody Loves Somebody and the Rat Pack films and the television show that would run for 9 years. But his powers, the specific combination of voice and ease, and the particular kind of intelligence that disguised itself as nonchalance, that made everything he did look effortless in the way that only things requiring enormous effort can be made to look effortless. Dean Martin could walk into a room and own it without appearing to try. This was the thing, the not trying. He held a glass of something amber, and he smiled at the right moment, and he said the right thing, and the room rearranged itself around him, without anyone quite noticing that it had. He had been doing this since Steubenville, Ohio, since before he ever sang a note professionally, since long before Jerry Lewis or Capitol Records or Las Vegas or any of the things that the world associated with his name. The ease was not manufactured, it was constitutional. It was simply who he was. Elvis Presley was 25 years old that January and had just returned from 2 years in the army in Germany. He was thinner than he had been before he left. He was quieter. 2 years of being a regular person, of being a soldier rather than Elvis Presley, of having his days structured by something other than his own fame, had done something to him that the people who knew him before could see, but not entirely name. He was still recognizably himself. He was also in some way more careful, more watchful, less certain of the space he was permitted to occupy in any given room. He was in the Bel Air house that January evening because someone had brought him, and because he was 25 and just back, and because saying no to invitations was not yet a skill he had fully developed. He was standing near the fireplace with a glass of Coca-Cola when Dean Martin came to stand beside him. What followed was, by the accounts of the people who were close enough to hear it, a conversation that lasted approximately 20 minutes and covered several topics before arriving at the one that this story is about. They talked about the army. They talked about Germany. Dean asked about the music scene over there, which surprised Elvis because it was a real question, not a polite question, not the kind of question a famous man asks a younger famous man at a party to fill a moment, but a question that suggested Dean had actually thought about what it might be like to be Elvis Presley in an army base in Germany for 2 years with a guitar and a bunk and the world's largest record collection in your head. Elvis answered it honestly, which also surprised him. He was not always honest at parties. Parties rewarded a certain kind of performed ease that he had learned to produce when required. But Dean Martin was not performing ease that evening. He was simply at ease. And the difference between performing a thing and being it was the kind of difference Elvis noticed. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. At some point, a man came through the room with a tray of drinks. Dean took a fresh glass. He looked at the Coca-Cola in Elvis's hand. He said in the tone of a man making a casual observation rather than a challenge, "You don't drink." Elvis said he didn't know. Dean nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at the room. Then he said something that Elvis repeated to people he trusted for years afterward, not because it stung, but because it stayed. The way certain things stay not because they hurt, but because they are true in a way that takes a long time to fully understand. Dean said, "That's going to make certain things harder for you." Elvis asked, "What things?" Dean said, "The room. Managing the room when the room is not a crowd. A crowd is easy. You know how to handle a crowd. A crowd wants what you have and you give it to them, and everybody goes home satisfied. But a room like this, he gestured, not dramatically, just slightly, at the party around them. A room like this doesn't want anything from you. It has no script. The people in it are not there to receive anything. They are just there, being themselves. And you have to find a way to be yourself inside that, without the music, and without the stage, and without the 50,000 people to stand between you and the silence. He took a drink from his glass. He said, "The glass helps, not because of what's in it, because it gives your hands something to do while you find out who you are in the room." Elvis looked at his Coca-Cola. Dean said, "I'm not telling you to drink. I'm telling you that you're going to need to find your own version of the glass, something that gives you a way to be still in a room without needing the room to need you. Because the rooms that need you are going to get smaller. Not because you'll get less famous, you'll probably get more famous, but because the older you get, the more the rooms that matter are the ones that don't need anything from you. And those are the hardest rooms there are." He finished his drink. He set the glass on the mantelpiece beside them. He said, "You've got everything else. The voice, the instinct, the thing that happens when you walk onto a stage. That part nobody can teach you and nobody needs to. But the room without the stage, that's the part that takes the longest to learn. I'm still learning it." He smiled at something across the party and moved away, the way Dean Martin moved at parties, easily, without apparent direction, arriving exactly where he needed to be. Elvis stood by the fireplace for a moment. He looked at his Coca-Cola. He looked at the room. He did not drink. He never drank, not in the way Dean meant, not the amber glass way that gave Dean Martin's hands something to do while the room sorted itself out. That particular solution was not available to him for reasons that had nothing to do with choice. Elvis had a constitution that did not tolerate alcohol, had known it since his teens, and the Coca-Cola in his hand was not an affectation or a statement. It was simply what he drank. But the thing Dean Martin had said stayed. The room without the stage. The room that doesn't need anything from you. The hardest rooms there are. The people who knew Elvis across the years, the musicians, the friends, the people who were in rooms with him that had no stage and no audience and no script, describe him in ways that suggest he understood what Dean Martin meant and spent a long time working on the problem Dean had identified. That he was in small rooms, in ordinary rooms, in rooms that did not need him, a more complicated and more interesting person than the stage Elvis suggested. More uncertain sometimes, more searching, more willing to sit in the silence and see what it held, rather than fill it with the performance of himself that the larger rooms required. He never fully solved it. Neither, for that matter, did Dean Martin, despite the amber glass and the constitutional ease and the decades of practice. These are not problems that get solved. They are problems that get managed, imperfectly, over a lifetime, in rooms of all sizes and kinds. What Dean Martin had that Elvis did not have was the nonchalance, the not caring visibly, the ability to be in a room that did not need him and to appear not to need the room either, to stand there with his glass and his smile as though the whole arrangement were entirely satisfactory to him and had been all along. Elvis could fill rooms. He could fill them in ways that no one else in his generation could match, in ways that the people who were present for the best of those performances spent the rest of their lives trying to describe. He could walk onto a stage and make 2,000 people feel that he was performing specifically for each of them, that the song was about something they personally understood, that the connection between the man at the microphone and the person in row 14 was the only connection in the room. But the small room, the room without the stage, the room that does not need anything from you, that was Dean Martin's room. Dean Martin was the best in that room that anyone who spent time with both of them ever saw. He walked into it the way he walked into every room, easily, glass in hand, as though arriving somewhere he had always been going and was not in any hurry to leave. Elvis watched him do it across many years in many rooms. He did not replicate it. He could not. The instrument was different. The wiring was different. What Dean Martin could do in a small room required a particular kind of indifference to the room that Elvis, for all his gifts, did not have. He cared too much. He noticed too much. He could not look at a room and not see the people in it and respond to what he saw. That was the limitation. It was also, if you looked at it from the other direction, the source of everything else. The noticing, the caring, the man counting coins under a table, the woman's voice from the third row, the veteran at the gate, the family in the back corner booth. All of it came from the same place, from a constitutive inability to be in a room and not be affected by what the room contained. Dean Martin could walk through a room like smoke. Nothing caught him, nothing held him. It was one of the great gifts of his particular personality, and it gave him a kind of freedom that Elvis, for all of his, did not have. What Elvis had instead was the stage. And the stage, when the room was right, and the work had been done, and the moment had arrived, was not a lesser thing. It was simply a different thing. The best version of a different thing that anyone in that era, or perhaps any era, had ever managed to produce. Dean Martin understood that too. He said so, in his own way, at a party in Bel Air in January 1960, to a 25-year-old man from Tupelo with a glass of Coca-Cola and everything still ahead of him. He said, "You've got everything else." He meant it. You could tell because Dean Martin, when he didn't mean something, didn't say it. That was another gift of the nonchalance. The words that came out of it tended to be the ones that were actually true. Elvis kept the Coca-Cola. He kept everything else. He found his own version of the glass eventually. Not a drink, but a way of being still in the difficult rooms. Not Dean's version, but his own. Imperfect, searching, arrived at slowly over the years. He learned the room without the stage. He never stopped learning it. Neither did Dean. That is, in the end, the part that neither of them talked about publicly, that the people who were close to both of them came to understand through long observation. The ease that Dean Martin displayed and the intensity that Elvis displayed were different surfaces of the same interior work. The work of being a person in rooms of all sizes, with and without an audience, in the years when the fame was new, and in the years when it was old, and in all the years in between. Dean was better at making it look easy. Elvis was better at making it feel necessary. The world needed both. It got both. That January evening in Bel Air, for 20 minutes by the fireplace, it got them in the same room at the same time, which was, by any accounting, a remarkable thing. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who understands the difference between the stage and the room, and the long work of learning to be yourself in both. Subscribe for more stories about who these people were when the performances were over. And tell us in the comments, which is harder for you, the crowd or the room? The stage or the small conversation after? Leave your answer below. There is a photograph taken at a similar party a few years later that shows Elvis and Dean Martin in the same frame at a Hollywood gathering. They are not talking to each other in the photograph. They are on opposite sides of the room. Dean is doing what Dean always did at parties, standing slightly apart, glass in hand, the faint suggestion of a smile, entirely at ease in a room that was not a stage and not asking him to be anything other than what he already was. Elvis is talking to someone, leaning slightly in, attentive in the specific way Elvis was attentive, as though the person he was talking to was the only person in the room. Two different ways of being in the world, two different gifts, two men who understood each other, in the way that serious craftsmen in the same discipline understand each other, across the distance of very different constitutions and very different relationships to the rooms they move through. Dean Martin died in 1995. He was 78 years old. In the years after Elvis died in 1977, Dean spoke about him the way he spoke about most things, briefly, without sentimentality, but with a precision that suggested real thought. He called him unrepeatable. He said there was nobody before him who did what he did, and nobody after who did it either. He said it in the flat, declarative tone of a man making an observation about the weather, not as praise exactly, but as fact. Coming from Dean Martin, in that tone, it was the highest thing there was. Elvis would have understood that. He understood Dean Martin's particular language, the way the nonchalance was the frame, not the content, the way the ease was the surface, and the seriousness was underneath it, invisible to people who were not paying close attention, and entirely visible to people who were. Elvis was always paying close attention. It was, as noted, one of the things he could not help. Two men, a party in Bel Air, January 1960, a fireplace and a glass of Coca-Cola, and 20 minutes that neither of them forgot. The room without the stage, and the long work of learning to inhabit it. They each found their own way. They each kept learning. That too is something they had in common. The understanding that the work does not end, that the room is always slightly harder than the last room, that the glass in the hand and the Coca-Cola in the other hand are both just ways of staying present in the difficulty of being a person among other people in rooms that do not need anything from you. The difficulty is the same. The tools are different. The work goes on. January 1960 was a long time ago. The house in Bel Air has changed hands many times. The party is not documented in any archive. The conversation by the fireplace was witnessed by a handful of people, remembered by fewer, and has passed forward the way most true things pass forward. Imperfectly, selectively, in pieces, through the people who were there and the people they told, and the people those people told in turn. What remains of it is this: two men standing by a fireplace, one with an amber glass and one with a Coca-Cola, and 20 minutes in which the man with the amber glass said something true about the room without the stage, and the man with the Coca-Cola listened, and neither of them forgot it. The room without the stage is the hardest room. Dean Martin was the best in it that most people who knew both of them ever saw. Elvis was the best on the stage that most people who knew both of them ever saw. They were, in those two rooms, the best of their respective kinds, and they knew it about each other, and that knowing shaped the respect that ran between them for the rest of their lives. That is the whole of it. A party, a fireplace, a glass of something amber and a glass of Coca-Cola, and a truth about the hardest rooms quietly passed from one serious man to another on a January night in Hollywood, when the city outside was cool and the hills were dark and the work was still ahead of both of them. It is always ahead of both of them. That was the other thing Dean Martin understood that he never said directly, but that the Coca-Cola in Elvis's hand and the amber glass in his own both expressed in their different ways. The work does not end. The rooms keep coming. You find your tools and you go in. That is all there is. That is, if you are very lucky and very good enough.